After starting my first series, My Problem With, last week, it's time for the second series this week. So welcome to Secret Origins. In this series, named after the anthology comic books by DC Comics, I won't be looking at the actual origins of a character within the story. There's already someone on YouTube who does that under that name. He's called Linkara, and there's a link for his series in the doobly-doo. Rather, this series will be about the inspiration for and creation of famous fictional characters and worlds. Today's episode is about a character that will appear again on the show because he himself is the inspiration for many other characters. So let's talk about the secret origins of Superman. If you were to browse an American newsstand in the summer of 1938, you might find a brightly colored booklet, the first issue of Action Comics. On the cover, some bloke, quite muscular and wearing a silly outfit, but otherwise normal looking, smashes a car into a rock. Apparently, a lot of people were intrigued to know why he's so strong that he can do that, why he would use his strength to destroy a perfectly good car, and above all, while he would do it wearing his jammies. Because the character on the cover went on to become the perhaps most popular comic book character of all time, Superman. This very comic introduces him as the champion of the oppressed. Later, he will be known as many different things: the Man of Tomorrow, the Man of Steel, the Last Son of Krypton, or just Clark Kent, the mild-mannered reporter. Over the years, with the help of many different creators working on the comics, movies, radio and TV shows, the story of Superman was developed to the point we all know today. After finding out that his home planet Krypton is about to blow up, the scientist Jor-El managed to send his infant son Kal-El away in a spaceship. This ship then crashed in the farmlands of the Kents in Smallville, Kansas. They take the boy in as their own, giving him the name Clark. Here we already see two big influences on the story of Superman. One of them is fairly well known and often pointed out, the other one not so much so. Let's get the obvious one out of the way first. Kal-El being sent away in a spaceship is obviously inspired by the biblical story of Moses, who was also sent away as a baby, but since there weren't any spaceships around in biblical times, just down the river Nile in a basket. The other influence, which is less obvious, most likely for the reason it's not tied to multiple major religions, are the stories about John Carter of Mars. This pulp hero, created by Edgar Rice Burroughs, also known for creating Tarzan, seems to be the polar opposite of Superman at first glance. Instead of an extraterrestrial on Earth, John Carter is from Earth, while his adventures take place on Mars. Like Superman though, he discovers that he has powers when he's not on his own planet. The main power that he shares with Superman is a power that isn't associated with Superman very often anymore: jumping really high. Superman's powers actually changed a lot over the years. Back in the early days, it was established that he was faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, and able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. These powers are all basically just, he can do what most humans can do, but he's better at it, hence Superman. The leaping was later changed into flying, after the creators of the cartoons and radio show found it difficult to have Superman hop all over the place without it getting silly. This was the first time Superman was able to do something that normal humans weren't able to do at all. Over the years, some other extra powers were added: heat and X-ray vision, freezing breath, and, in keeping with the original vision of his powers, exceptional senses. As a young adult, Clark moves to the big city of Metropolis, where he becomes a journalist at a newspaper called the Daily Planet. When he's not on the job, Clark dons a blue suit and red cape and flies around helping people in various ways as Superman, most notably in the form of preventing large-scale catastrophes, although he also deals with more mundane stuff, saving kittens from trees, talking people out of suicide, the works. So that the people around him don't find out about his double life, Clark puts on glasses and a more mild-mannered persona in his normal life, often giving more spotlight to his co-worker and love interest, Lois Lane. If anyone wants to explain to me how he couldn't just fit into a regular life without being recognized in the real world, I want to point out two things right about now. Firstly, yes, he could. People are actually really bad at recognizing celebrities. Charlie Chaplin once failed to even enter a Charlie Chaplin lookalike contest, while Dolly Parton once lost a Dolly Parton lookalike contest to a man in drag. Christopher Reeves, who played Superman in a few movies, was often asked for autographs when people saw him in his Superman outfit, but nobody realized who he was when he was in his Clark Kent getup. Secondly, even if it wouldn't work, Superman comics are about an alien who looks just like a human flying around town. How is this plausible, while a paper-thin disguise isn't? But back to Lois Lane. Her character was inspired by the reporter Teresa Torchy Blaine, who was the lead character of 9 movies released around the time that Superman was created. In one of these movies, Torchy Blaine in Panama, released a mere month before Superman's first comic, she was played by an actress called Lola Lane, who Lois is named after. Her first name was properly chosen because Lois and Clark sounds very similar to Lewis and Clark, the two adventurers who led an expedition to the American West Coast in the early 19th century. Alongside Superman himself, she's the only recurring character who appeared in the original comic. Now, let's take a look at what Superman's creators, Siegel and Schuster, did before 1938. The two met in Cleveland, Ohio in the early 30s, when they were both still teenagers. Siegel, who had been writing stories since his school days, found an illustrator in Schuster. The two started working on their self-published magazine, simply called Science Fiction. In the third issue, they published a story called The Reign of the Superman, the first of 3 times the two would use that name. This Superman, however, was not a hero, but rather a bad guy with telepathic powers. Siegel's inspiration for this came from Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of the Superman, the ideal human who, in Nietzsche's opinion, should lead mankind. In Siegel's story, a mad scientist believes himself to be said Superman. I have to point out that the later version of Superman, the one that this episode is about, has no relationship to the concept by Nietzsche. Clark Kent isn't using his powers to be the leader of mankind. Instead, he uses his powers to help out. Even though he technically isn't a human, he acts like one, just with the difference that he has physical powers that no real human has. The person who actually believes himself to be somewhat of the Nietzsche-type Superman is Lex Luthor, one of our hero's main antagonists. Like the Reign Superman, he is bald and wants to rule the world. He first appeared 2 years after Superman did, and ever since, the two have been clashing. The two are polar opposites, with Luthor not having any powers, but believing himself to be superior to everybody else. Since he doesn't have any powers, the methods he used to try and take over the world come from the two resources he actually has: his money and his mind. In his earlier appearances, he was a mad scientist. Ever since the movie version of Dr. Frankenstein back in the early 30s, those were kinda popular for quite a while, although that wasn't the case anymore by the mid-80s. What, however, was really popular at the time was the villain running a big company. This kind of villain, fittingly enough, fits both the 30s and the 80s really well. Buying his way into high positions brought him as far in his quest to become a lowercase s Superman and fighting uppercase s Superman as the sciencey stuff did earlier in the comic. It even brought him into the White House for a while, but some random rich dude with a superiority complex cheating his way to an American presidency? That's just beyond belief, isn't it? I'm sure glad I live in the real world, where only qualified people get to run countries. Wait, I was talking about what happened before Action Comics #1 was published, wasn't I? Let's get back into that, it's a less aggravating topic. The second project the Siegel and Schuster called Superman was a reworking, that's what they called rip-offs back in the day, of the Pulp Fiction hero Hugo Danner, a really strong, but otherwise normal man who donned a silly outfit to fight crime, calling himself the Gladiator. This story is much more of a blueprint for the now famous character than Reign was, although Reign is mentioned in this context far more frequently. In 1935, National Publications, later renamed to DC Comics, a comic company founded the year before, picked up the young creatives. A few years later, they reworked their own reworking, or in today's terms, they ripped off their own rip-off. For their troubles, they only got $130. That's around $2,000 in today's money. So it's safe to say that they were ripped off for the rip-off of their rip-off. They gave the mild-mannered reporter the appearance of the comedic actor Harold Lloyd, most famous for being the guy dangling from a big clock, while his appearance as Superman was based on action star Douglas Fairbanks, most famous for being the old-timey Robin Hood who isn't Errol Flynn. Superman's costume was modeled upon the colorful get-ups that wrestlers, strongmen, and various other circus performers were wearing at the time, down to underoos worn on the wrong side of the trousers. These weren't really undies though, rather they were trunks. Circus performer wore, and actually still wear them, because the tights they sport for easier movement don't conceal their junk very well, so they cover that up with these trunks, which look very much like undies. It's interesting to see how this kind of outfit now makes us think of superheroes, not circus performers, even though Superman hasn't worn them for more than 5 years now. Now, circus performers actually wore capes like Superman does back in the day, although unlike him, they just wore them for show before they started performing and took them off after their entrance. A cape, gown or mantle, especially a red one, has been seen as a piece of very dignified clothing for knights and the like. This red color of his cape as Superman is only used very subtly in form of a necktie in his everyday Clark Kent getup. Like his personas of the Man of Steel and the mild-mannered reporter couldn't be further apart, so too are his childhood home of Smallville and his base of operation Metropolis polar opposites. While Smallville is a stereotypical quiet town where nothing, especially nothing bad, ever happens, Metropolis is a behemoth of a city, with thousands upon thousands of people going about their business. The inspiration of Smallville can be found in the idyllic portrayals of American small-town life that were popular at the time, especially the works of painter Norman Rockwell. Metropolis, on the other hand, is a stand-in of an American, metropolis. The term comes from Greek and translates to Mother City. Using this as a name for a city, rather than just a descriptor, tells the reader this could be any big city, just as the name Smallville communicates this is any old sleepy farm town. Of course, using the word metropolis as a name for a city wasn't a new idea by the Superman writers. Fritz Lang also showed us a city called Metropolis in his movie of the same name a dozen years earlier. His Metropolis, though, is largely portrayed as negative, while Superman's Metropolis is portrayed neutrally, sometimes positively. The one thing that's constant about Metropolis, though, is that it isn't constant at all. It always keeps up with the time the story is published, always appearing as what is seen as a lowercase m Metropolis at the time. Nearly 80 years after Superman first appeared, a lot has changed. The world we live in today is very different from the world of 1938. It's a world where Superman is a cultural icon, not just a strange idea from a random comic book. He has become a source of inspiration for many other things, and I'm sure I mention him from time to time in upcoming episodes of Secret Origins. As comics with him are still being published, his story will take a lot of inspiration from other things, so what I've listed couldn't possibly be a full list. It's just meant to be a quick look at how lots of different things can come together to create a new story. With the dozens upon dozens of colorful friends and foes Superman has, it would take hours to give anything closer to a full overview anyway, but I'm sure I'll return to talk about some of his fellow heroes in future episodes of this series. I've already made plans for the other big heroes of DC Comics. There will be also episodes about the heroes from Marvel, and even lots of stuff that isn't from comic books. I hope you'll be here for that, and for whatever I'm doing next week. Oh, and if you want to suggest a subject for a future episode, feel free to tell me.